What about now, dear Cal? You know what I mean?
This thing has a really good zoom.
Okay, don't be crazy. Everyone's gonna know I'm insane. My name is Jenny Espino. I was born and raised in Corpus Christi, though I have lived in a few other places, most notably North Carolina, where my dad was stationed for many years. I lived on Camp Lejeune there. And yeah, having grown up in Corpus, initially on the west side, and then moved to Camp Lejeune and then come back to Corpus, where specifically water issues are huge in each of those places. And yeah, issues around contamination and access are huge problems. Yeah, that shaped a lot of my upbringing. So I grew up, had some of my most formative years in Corpus, becoming an organizer, training to become a professional dancer, and then eventually a dance teacher. And yeah, what else do you want to know? The thing that I like and dislike about Corpus is related, right? So that there is this sense of organized abandonment that, like, Corpus oftentimes doesn't feel like a real place. It feels like anyone can do anything here, and not in the, like, believe in yourself, live, laugh, love sort of way, in a way that, like, anyone gets away with anything here, that the industries can do anything that they want, that actually no one is protecting us. It's really hard, for us to have a sense of protecting ourselves. So I think we've spent decades trying to build that sense of community, but yeah, it is hard to feel like Corpus is a real place sometimes. That's the same reason in many ways that I really love Corpus, is because we've spent so much time and effort building our own networks, because we've felt so abandoned by all sorts of entities. And so it's created this space in which, if you want to carve out space for art or organizing or any of the things that are important to you, there's nothing but room and the ability to do that. Will it be resourced? Will it be, those are all larger questions, right? But that we've made that happen in spite of everything. Where do I even start here? Yeah, I have an aunt who really fostered a love of art in me. My mom always really encouraged us to be creative too. And so it's basically been a really important part of my life. I went to a really good elementary school on base that had really good arts programs. And so, yeah, it's always been something that it was encouraged in me, is like having some form of creative outlet, especially since like my older sister and younger sister both took an interest in soccer or sports, and that, like, just very clearly early on was not something that I was invested in, but I was invested in being, like, active and moving. And so dance was kind of like the natural outcome of, like, me needing and wanting a physical outlet and never being able to stay still, and having a desire to have some kind of physical outlet combined with this, like, creative outlet that was fostered in me really early on by people in my family. Yeah, my earliest influences were watching any of the various Jacksons in music videos, right? Wanting to understand how they moved the way that they moved, and, like, having a organic ability to kind of, like, pick up on movement. Yeah, those were, like, the earliest, I guess, examples of me taking an interest in art and in dance specifically. I like was in an arts program, and actually like the focus of which I think was singing at the time, and it was like a hip-hop version of Zippity Doodah in elementary school. And the teacher told my parents that they needed to get me in dance immediately. And I actually had no concept that I was like at all doing well until, yeah, she told my parents. And that was kind of the start of things. I taught hip-hop, contemporary, and jazz mostly, though I've subbed and taught different styles at different times, but those are the three main styles that I taught for many years. I forgot what I was saying. I need a new brain. What the fuck did you ask? Yeah, so I don't have this extreme need to express my political ideas or values in my art, because so much of that is expressed in my organizing life, but you can't divorce my politics or my values from me. Therefore, it is a through line in a lot of my work, specifically contemporary work, which mostly centers around mental health and capitalism's impact on our collective mental health and the mental health of individuals, I would say, is the clearest through line in my work. And so a lot of it grapples with how to be well in a society that is not built for us and that breeds mental illness. Like, how do people be well when everything about the system is set up to cripple and crush us? How do people be well when we know the extent of not only our own human suffering, but human suffering the world over that is being caused by capitalism and imperialism and other societal ills? A lot of that centers around home life, because so much of what capitalism requires of us is to exist in the world in a particular way and, yeah, put our own health to the side. And so a lot of that work centers around what happens when we can't actually disrupt capitalism. There's not a moment to process grief or any of the other various things that we experience as normal humans. Yeah, community is everything to me. I think it's really hard for dancers to find a place because there's so much emphasis on particular kinds of art and consuming art in a specific way. And I think dance is a little bit more difficult for people to like consume. And I know that's a crazy thing to say in the age of TikTok, when like dance has been seemingly democratized in all of these ways, but just like all other forms of art that have been commodified, it's very difficult for folks to take like an earnest interest in dance beyond like what they understand as dance, which is like TikTok dancing, what you see in music videos. And I want to be clear that there's like value in all of that. Like TikTok has done wonders in democratizing dance in the same way that, you know, making art accessible and popularizing certain forms of art is a blessing. It's also incredibly burdensome because people only view dance as what they see on TikTok or what they see in music videos or at the VMAs. Those are all real forms of dance and art that have value. Oftentimes it's really troubling because people will diminish the value of those, not recognizing that also diminishes the value of the culture that created those forms of art, hip-hop, jazz, funk, increasingly forms of dance that were originated in queer spaces. And so I don't say that at all to put things at odds with other forms, you know, of expression through dance. But it does make it difficult when you have to make movement palatable to the largest audience. And so it's been a real blessing to have the Dance Collective and to be able to bring people in through the Dance Collective, sort of gaining popularity or being known for hip hop, and having done quite a few music videos locally and engaged with, all the local festivals and places where dancers perform. So it's meant a lot to be able to share contemporary work, or do like fun stuff with jazz, that I think a lot of folks would not have seen if there hadn't been a draw from the work that the collective has been able to do with hip hop. That has opened a lot of doors for dancers to be seen as multidimensional creators, which is really exciting to me, because I think most people don't realize how hard most dancers train in all forms, like in all styles, that most, at least competitive, pre-professional, and professional dancers, train really hard to understand movement fundamentally in styles that they may never visit again after, they're done with dance, whether that's doing dance recreationally or doing dance in some professional capacity. And so to have the community not just support dancers or the collective or whatever else, but also like engage with works that I created or that the dancers created, is just incredibly, incredibly special. To give kids a space to not just come and learn as sponges absorbing information. And of course, I think it's wildly valuable for kids to understand technique, in terms of the importance of injury prevention, but also just movement invention is something that kids are not actually necessarily taught to prioritize when they're receiving dance education. So to have them be able to come in and experiment and create, and not just come in and do across the floor and do turns and leaps and learn things that I have created for them, but to be able to create things with dancers as co-creators, to be able to have them shape what the pieces become, is really one of the most special things that I think the Dance Collective was able to accomplish and instill in dancers from the start, is a sense of creative agency. Locally, the only real opportunities kids have to dance is to hope to get a scholarship to a dance studio, or hope that there's dance in their schools. And as someone who did drill team and understands the value of that, I'm glad that there are still some dance programs and that there are some really talented drill teams in Corpus. But the experience of dancing in drill team, as someone who was trained in a studio and did drill team dance and then subsequently taught in a studio, it's incredibly different. For me, a lot of what is most valuable to me as someone who is an organizer probably first, and a dancer and teacher after that, is that there is no prioritization of the art. Of course, schooling as a whole, public schooling, has been defunded, and the arts are always the first to be gutted anytime austerity is on the table. And so to be able to create a space absent of that, where dancers, are able to dance regardless of income, is one of the most meaningful things I've ever done as someone who was only really able to dance because of huge fundraising efforts and scholarships, and then subsequently teaching at a pretty young age, which enabled me to take class, it's meant everything. One of the things that I was really excited for the collective to be able to take on really early on was encouraging kids to explore video work, because so much of what our kids did as competitive dancers is concert dance, so dance for like recitals or showcases, competitions, or on stage. And then anytime that they were videoed, it was because they were doing like music videos for local artists, in which oftentimes what you're doing is like you have no control over how that video is used. Oftentimes it's choreographed meticulously for a specific part of the song, and then you see the music video and it's not matched up. It's just, you're just bodies. Oftentimes it's like not even the same tempo, which is an artist's, prerogative to do. Artists have the freedom to use the work that they've paid for however they want to, so I don't have any resentment about that. But it is to say that it's rare that dancers are encouraged to participate in or create work for video that is not for commercial use. And so it's really cool to be able to have done a showcase annually that's entire focus was video work, because these kids have danced on stage countless times. And so often, they're being judged in those instances too, and they base their entire worth as artists, as dancers, on how they are judged in 2 to 4 minutes on stage in front of judges, and they've trained all year and don't actually get to showcase their work oftentimes the best that it can be, or in the way that it was actually intended to. So a thing that we started experimenting with was not just how do we, creatively video these works that we, created for competition or for soloists or whoever, right, for whatever reason. But how do we actually adapt pieces specifically for camera? So there's a lot of things that we created that actually wouldn't translate to stage without being adapted or readapted for stage, because we said, like, how do we create stuff through a very particular lens, literally and metaphorically, that will be viewed by people on screen, and perhaps never on some of the pieces that we filmed were never performed on stage, because we were also thinking about it through the lens of like specific shots or specific effects or like particular settings that actually don't translate to stage at all. And so that's an exciting thing to be able to introduce to dancers. Oddly enough, I started organizing around or against the death penalty. And at the time, the only people doing that in Corpus really were a group of nuns at Incarnate Word and Jim O'Leary, who went to the courthouse every Monday to hand out anti-death penalty lit. And a young group of punks would join him outside of the courthouse to do that. And so actually, like, my teen to early 20s were a very interesting convergence of like 3 really important parts of me that previously had sort of existed in isolation of one another to some extent. And I guess 4 if you count like my early life having grown up Catholic in Corpus, right? So there's this part of me that like grew up Catholic in Corpus and was like reckoning with like, what does that mean for me as someone who is, a little C communist, and like unpacking what all that was, right? And also like me as someone who, was like vegan and straight edge and was introduced to those concepts in the punk and hardcore scene and was also engaging with politics in that scene. And then me as a dancer who was like increasingly taking dance more seriously. It was just like this space where all of those things sort of met. We did a lot of anti-death penalty and anti-war organizing. Those were kind of the origins of things. I moved away to Denton and started doing some organizing around like labor solidarity and still a bunch of anti-war stuff and anti-death penalty organizing, and then moved back to Corpus and kind of was thrown into environmental justice organizing. At the time, there was a fight against Las Brisas, which was a pet coke plant that we were able to defeat, actually. It took years, but we were able to defeat. Most of my organizing since coming back to Corpus has centered around environmental justice, but also all other forms of organizing in Corpus that I've engaged in, from like union organizing to reproductive justice to housing justice to like nitty-gritty local budget sort of fights, to mutual aid. All of those things are shaped by environmental justice because this city is on the front lines of the fight against environmental racism and catastrophe. We have created slogans and campaigns around what we want to defund, but is also building a positive vision of what it could mean that we could fund if the city's budget was built for us at all, right? One of those things being arts programs for kids specifically, but also people of all ages need arts and physical activity. And dance is the combination of both of those things. That the city is not funding those things is criminal and a disservice to the people who live here. Yeah, that's the sort of positive vision that I think a lot of us are hoping to create and expand the political imagination of what people can demand beyond just survival and beyond just like drinking water and the bread and butter issues that people think of when they think of organizing. Of course, those things are vital. You can't dance if you don't eat. You can't dance if you don't have water. You can't dance if you don't have a place to live. You can, but it's incredibly difficult. So, of course, we have to center those things in so much of what we do, but as we well know, the worker deserves bread and roses. Your art hold on, let me start that off. For me, I increasingly struggle with the thought of like art being resistance. Art is resistance. Art can be incredibly subversive. What I take issue with is art as a substitute for engaging in your community, which I don't think it is. And I think all of the most prominent political artists who had something meaningful to say were shaped by their actual engagement in movements, their engagement in organizing, their engagement in countercultures. You don't get to check out and say, this is my contribution to the movement, this is my contribution to my community, this says everything that I have to say. Actually, no, it doesn't. I don't think you can treat your art as a substitute for meaningful engagement and for developing resistance against all of the bullshit that we're against. It's not that. Art tells the story of our experiences under capitalism, and it has the ability to then shape a lot of what that looks like and shape culture in ways that are really positive. It's an incredibly powerful tool, and we have to use it in every way that we can, but it will never be the thing. It will never be, in and of itself, the protest, the resistance, the revolution. It can be revolutionary. I think revolutionary artists throughout time have proven that. My biggest influence as an educator is Isadora Duncan, who is the godmother of modern dance, who moved to Russia during the Bolshevik Revolution and formed dance education programs They democratized dance education, which is, in part, is why Russia has such brilliant dancers, that, like, the legacy of that lives on. But she didn't say, okay, here are some gorgeous modern dance pieces. Here's my contribution to modern dance. And then absolve herself of any responsibility to actually shape the next generation of dancers, wherever that may be, right? I think this is difficult because, like, a lot of, like, there's two answers to this question, is like, what influences me as a creative and what influences me as an educator. And the people who influence me as an educator are, Paulo Freire, Vygotsky, Isadora Duncan, obviously. But who influences me as a dancer and as a choreographer is a different question. Like, my earliest influences are like pop choreographers, Tina Landon, Fatima Robinson, right? Who I still think are geniuses. But in terms of like contemporary dance, really influenced by Andrew Winkhart and Martha Nichols. I think they're doing really, really inspiring things visually and aesthetically. In terms of, like, who influences me as a creative, in terms of, like, the themes that I explore, John Berger's, I think a lot of what he's contributed has shaped the way that I understand art. And I think Mark Fisher has written some of the, probably more than anyone, that is, like, inspired the work, a lot of the work that I'm most proud of, both in terms of, like, his analysis of culture and art, and what he had to say about capitalism's impact on mental health. I will be grieving Mark Fisher. Girls don't miss their exes. They miss Mark Fisher.
That's the intro.
My advice is to create relentlessly, like, in spite of everything, about everything, and whatever you're doing with dance. There are so many tools. I don't think any of them are a substitute for actually existing in community, that actually class and engaging with dance as a culture. Like, you can never actually replace that you can learn as much as you want on YouTube tutorials or through TikTok. I don't want to devalue that. I think that's a great way for people to be introduced and to engage other people in dance. I really hate when people unnecessarily shit on TikTok dancing. I have a lot of criticisms, right? But I think however people find dance is good, actually. But that you actually do have to go to class, you do go to auditions, go to the club, go wherever it is that people are dancing, because, like all art, culture is bigger than just the consumption and, like, superficial education that you can get off of social media or YouTube or whatever else. And the point isn't to, like, go to class so that you can be the best, though, like, a lot of people want to be. The point is to be able to have some form of expression in spite of everything that capitalism does to us. And oftentimes because of everything that capitalism does to us, right? And so, I would just encourage people to create, and not just that, but to carve out space to share what you're creating. Participate in spaces that people have already created, build those spaces up, that we actually don't always have to reinvent the wheel. There are, people who are engaging with all kinds of art, including dance and Corpus, that you could actually simply connect with. It's hard for, like, me to talk about this because I went from teaching 4 to 6 hours a day, most days of the week, for many years, to transitioning out of teaching full time And I only teach, every month, every other month, I'll do like a workshop or a drop-in class. So much of like my self-worth has been shaped by like the impact either I feel like I've had on my kids or my kids have expressed like in very clear terms that I've had on them. And so that was my identity for so long, was as a teacher first, and my assistant directed a pre-professional company for many years before starting the dance collective. And it really wasn't until like the tail end of that and then establishing the dance collective that I saw my role not just as a teacher, though like I still think that's probably the most important thing that I feel like I've done in my life, is be able to teach and shape like, a few generations of dancers in whatever way, regardless of what kind of dancers and artists they became, to come to class thinking not just what they can get out of it, but like what they can contribute, because kids have a lot to contribute that like they're not often asked to, they're asked to like come and absorb. Yeah, it wasn't until establishing the dance collective that I started to feel like I had something to say as an artist, and not just as a teacher or as a choreographer, and not just someone who is strictly choreographing for dance competitions. Competitions are so draining. Again, like you have like 3 minutes to showcase every trick, turn, and leap. It's no measure of their worth. And in the same way that dancers measure their worth by what the judges have to say about their performance, like choreographers are also judging our worth by how a piece is scored. And a lot has changed for the better in competitive dance, that like it's not necessarily the case that pieces with the most tricks are going to perform best or score best, but there's still a lot to be challenged there. And so moving out of that space and creating for the sake of creating and not creating for a score has actually given me a lot of purpose. And so I'm hoping that those contributions to the community, both as a teacher and an artist, and of course as an organizer, are things that are felt, and that art has been able to be healing and get people into actually organizing.
Your clothes in the dryer, your hair on the shower wall. Your toothbrush is too much, your shoes empty in the hall. Your keys on the counter, your dirty dish in the sink. Please don't make me see these things. The books on your shelf that you never read, the hunting knife you kept by your bed, the flowers you dried and tied up with twine suspended from the ceiling. You tell me you love me like it'll be the last time, like you're playing out the end of a storyline. I say I love you too, because it's true. What else am I supposed to do? Cut your hair, get a job, change your name, change your mind, change your ways, give them time. Go back to school, go back to sleep. Tell the secret you can't keep. Begin, be done.